This is the story of a boy named Harold who comes from another dimension and can create anything with just his crayon. So, he comes to the real world to look for his creator, but he soon realizes that this world does not exist. That's what I thought, so make yourself comfortable and let yourself be told the story of Harold and his magic crayon. So, let's start. This story begins with a boy who has a magic crayon and can draw whatever he wants. He first created two friends so that they would always be with him. They were Porcupine and Moose. Together, the three of them spent their time in this imaginary world, where we noticed that its dimension is in 3D, and they spent the whole day having fun. We noticed that this little guy called Harold spends his time drawing everything he wants. You know that with his magic crayon, he can create whatever he wants. Thanks to this, they make their world and their fun as they want. While we notice that every day, a narrator says good night to them and sends them to sleep as if they were his children. Time passes. We notice that Harold grows, just like his companions, but they still have the same imagination and spend their time having fun wherever they want. We also notice that sometimes it seems like they are in danger, but thanks to the magical crayon, they can always get out of any situation. Because the boys do not stop having fun, we also notice that if something happens to one of them, Harold quickly repairs it with his crayon. So on this side, they do not have complications. Then, Harold begins to be curious about what real life is like in the real world, but the narrator tells him that the world is not as good as he thinks. Although Harold still wants to know it and asks the narrator to take him there, he lets him know that this is impossible since they are from different dimensions. So the boys go to sleep while Harold is thinking about how to go to the real world. Because of this, Harold tells them that he is always dreaming about the real world, so he tells the narrator that he has endless questions to ask him. But the bad thing is that they realize the narrator is no longer answering them, so the boys begin to worry. However, it soon occurs to Harold that they can create a door to go to the real world. So, he quickly starts drawing it and tells his friends that they must cross it to look for their creator and find out what happened to him. At that moment, Porcupine hesitates because the narrator had warned them that the real world was not meant for them, while Moose seems unsure. Harold, determined, tells them to stay behind while he goes to find the creator. He then crosses the magic door, which we notice has 5th-generation quantum interdimensional travel capabilities. Soon, Harold arrives in the real world, where he transforms into a normal person. Meanwhile, Porcupine wants to cross the door, but he's still very insecure. Eventually, he musters the courage and crosses it. However, he accidentally lingers behind the door for a moment, and we see that as he reaches the real world, he too transforms into a human. The transformation is overwhelming for him. At the same time, Harold realizes that his outfit looks strange in the real world, so he quickly gets some clothes to blend in. He starts interacting with people, but they are not as friendly as he expected. Then, he runs into Moose, and they are overjoyed to see each other. They also notice an old man whom they think is the narrator. They quickly approach him, but the bad thing is that he ends up rejecting them. Harold then realizes that this old man is not the one they were looking for and decides to leave to avoid any trouble. Harold creates a plan to continue searching the city. Meanwhile, Porcupine finally manages to cross the door. He reaches the real world and also transforms into a human. He quickly starts looking for his friends. Meanwhile, Harold and Moose start their journey on the road, but they quickly realize they don't know how to drive very well. As they struggle, they meet a woman named Terry, who is accompanied by her son, Mel. Mel seems to have an imaginary friend named Carl. Unfortunately, Terry gets distracted and accidentally runs over the boys. During the accident, Moose gets so scared that he temporarily turns back into a real moose. Thankfully, everyone is fine. The only downside is that Terry notices her car was damaged and needs a new tire. Harold, using his magic crayon, quickly creates a tire for her. Mel is amazed by how Harold managed to do this. Meanwhile, Porcupine runs into the old man they saw earlier, but like the others, he also ends up rejecting her, leaving Porcupine feeling scared and confused. Feeling guilty about the accident, Terry offers to take the boys wherever they need to go. They explain that they don't have a place to stay and are new to the city. Mel, seeing how friendly they are, persuades his mom to let them stay at their home. Terry eventually agrees, and they all head to her house. She shows them to the attic, where they will stay. As they settle in, they learn that Terry used to play songs on the piano but couldn't follow her dreams and now works at a supermarket. Harold feels that Terry should pursue her dreams again. On the other hand, we notice that the old man reported the boys to the police. However, the police don't seem to believe him, which is fortunate for the boys. That night, as they're about to fall asleep, we see that Harold and Mel are starting to get along really well. Mel, still curious, asks Harold how he managed to create the tire. Harold smiles and tells him that he has a magic crayon. So, Harold shows Mel that he can create anything he wants with his magic crayon. Mel, curious and excited, asks if he can borrow the crayon for a few moments to try it out. Harold agrees, and Mel ends up creating a spider-like bee. However, the creature turns out to be not very friendly, causing some chaos. Meanwhile, Porcupine, Spin, is still on her journey to find her friends, but unfortunately, she ends up in the wrong house. The security system quickly alerts the authorities, and she has to flee. However, the cameras capture her face, so the authorities now know what she looks like. At dawn, Terry wakes up to find the house covered in spikes and other creations that Harold made, including breakfast. She also notices that the entire house has been repainted because Harold thought it needed a remodel. However, Terry still doesn't realize that Harold is doing all this with his magic crayon. Frustrated, she asks Harold not to put any more ideas into Mel's head, especially since Mel already has his imaginary friend, Carl. Terry then reminds the boys that they need to leave because Mel has to go to school, and she has to go to work. Terry asks Harold, Moose, and Porcupine to go back home, but Mel, now attached to them, decides he would rather help them find the old man they are searching for. So, he follows them. The boys, unsure of where to start looking, notice a library and realize it might have all the answers they need. They quickly head there and meet a man named Gary, who is busy creating a book. Unfortunately, no one seems interested in his book because it's a medieval story, which doesn't catch much attention. As they talk to Gary, they realize that he is in love with Terry. They notice that the princess in Gary's story looks a lot like Terry, which hints at his feelings for her. Thanks to Mel's encouragement, Gary decides to help them find the old man they're searching for. Gary starts looking on the internet, but he soon realizes that all they know is that the old man lives in the real world, which makes the search nearly impossible. Frustrated, Gary jokingly suggests that they could write a message in the sky by getting on a plane, so the old man might see it. Harold thinks this is a brilliant idea and quickly pulls out his magic crayon. Gary, noticing the crayon, comments on how it resembles the magic crayon from Harold's story, not realizing that this Harold is the same one from the story. Harold then creates a plane with his crayon, and as they prepare to write the message, Gary realizes that Harold and the boys are the characters from the very story he's familiar with. The excited group then decides to include Mel's mother's phone number in the message, hoping the old man will contact them when he sees it. A little time passes, and suddenly, Terry's phone starts ringing non-stop with calls from elderly men who mistakenly think she's searching for a husband. Confused and overwhelmed, she angrily tries to fend off the callers, not understanding why this is happening. At the same time, she's dealing with issues at work, where her supervisor at the supermarket tells her she needs to work harder if she wants to get promoted. When the boys arrive at Terry's workplace, she's frustrated and asks them to leave. Just then, she receives a call from Mel's school, informing her that Mel has gotten into trouble. She rushes to the school to pick him up, where it turns out Mel had a conflict with some classmates. They head back to the supermarket, and Terry, still stressed, gets back to work. Meanwhile, the boys, eager to help, realize that work is not as fun as they thought. Harold, trying to make things easier, starts using his crayon to assist people in the store. However, instead of helping, he ends up causing chaos, turning the whole place upside down. By the time Terry returns, the supermarket is in complete disarray. The supervisor, noticing the mess, realizes that Terry's unusual companions are responsible and, unfortunately, decides to fire her. As Terry is heartbroken, Harold tries to console her, reminding her that this might be a blessing in disguise. He tells her that now she can focus on her true dream, playing the piano. Harold tries to lift Terry's spirits, and that night, he uses his magic crayon to create a beautiful piano for her. Encouraged by everyone, Terry begins to play, and it becomes clear that she's incredibly talented. As the music fills the room, everyone is captivated by her skill. Just as the mood lightens, Gary arrives, breathless and excited. He tells them that he has found the location of the old man they've been searching for. The boys, excited but torn, say their goodbyes to Terry and Mel, who wishes he could go with them. Mel seems a bit suspicious of Gary, but his mother reassures him that they can trust him. Gary then reveals that they are actually the characters from the story of Harold and his magic crayon, and that they've somehow crossed dimensions into the real world. This revelation makes the search much easier because they now know that the creator of the book is the narrator they've been looking for. With this new information, they head off to find him. On the way, they run into Porcupine, and the group is overjoyed to be reunited. However, their joy is short-lived as the authorities suddenly arrive and arrest Porcupine. Harold tries to explain that they are all friends, but instead, the authorities arrest all three of them and confiscate Harold's magic crayon. Locked up and without the crayon, the boys quickly realize they need to come up with a plan to escape. Porcupine distracts the guard, allowing Harold to sneak over and retrieve the crayon. Once Harold has it, he quickly draws a key to unlock their cell. He then helps Porcupine get back into the cell and uses the crayon to put a padlock on the door, preventing the guards from re-entering. To make their escape even easier, Harold draws a giant ball that crashes through the wall, allowing them to flee. As they run, a fellow inmate jokes about wanting to buy some crayons for himself. Meanwhile, back at school, Mel is facing problems with his classmates. Feeling cornered, he remembers the piece of the crayon that Harold had given him. Desperate, Mel starts using his imagination and accidentally brings his imaginary friend, Carl, to life. However, Carl's presence quickly creates chaos, and Mel realizes he's in over his head. Frightened by the mess he's created, Mel runs away, trying to escape the situation. Unfortunately, the school principal believes that Mel was responsible for the chaos caused by his imaginary friend, Carl. Feeling guilty and misunderstood, Mel leaves school and finds his friends waiting for him outside. They quickly decide to head off together to find the old man they now know is the creator of the book. They have his exact address, so they're determined to meet him. Porcupine insists on driving, and although the others are hesitant, they let her take the wheel. It soon becomes clear that Porcupine loves speed, making everyone a bit nervous. Meanwhile, Gary, who was nearby, notices them speeding off and quickly follows in pursuit. On the other side of town, Terry gets a call from the school, informing her that Mel was involved in the disaster. To make matters worse, they tell her that Mel was seen leaving with some questionable characters, which worries her deeply. Using an app to track his location, Terry rushes out to find him. The boys finally arrive at the house of the book's creator, and Harold is filled with excitement at the thought of meeting his maker. However, their excitement turns to despair when they discover that the creator has recently passed away. As if things couldn't get any worse, Terry arrives, furious and protective of her son. She demands that Harold stay away from her and Mel, blaming him for the trouble they've caused. Harold, heartbroken and disillusioned, begins to lose hope. As his despair grows, the power of his crayon weakens. Everything he has created starts to disappear. His friends, the objects, and even the tire he made for Terry. Stranded in the middle of the road, Terry is left helpless as she watches everything unravel. Mel, who sees Gary driving by with Harold, notices that something is terribly wrong. He tries to convince his mother that Harold is in trouble and needs help, but she dismisses his concerns and sends him to his room when they get home. That night, Gary visits Harold and asks him to hand over the magic crayon. Gary explains that he wants to use it to bring the world from his book to life, so he can live out his fantasy and be with the princess who resembles Terry. Defeated and without hope, Harold reluctantly gives Gary the crayon. But what Harold doesn't expect is that Gary betrays him, trapping Harold so he can't interfere with his plan to bring his story to life in the real world. Gary's sinister intentions become clear as he prepares to use the magic crayon to merge the dimensions, with himself at the center of the fantasy world he's always dreamed of. At that critical moment, Mel arrives, determined to help Harold. But before he can do much, Gary quickly captures him too, taunting both boys as he prepares to create his dream world. Gary bids them farewell and rides off on a float he's conjured with the magic crayon. However, Mel suddenly remembers the half of the crayon that Harold had given him earlier. With renewed hope, they use it to free themselves, quickly creating a balloon to chase after Gary. As they catch up to Gary, Harold tries to convince him to stop, warning him that the crayon shouldn't be used to bring fictional worlds into reality. But Gary, blinded by his obsession, refuses to listen. He's determined to live in the world of his book, the one thing he loves most. Seeing no other option, Harold realizes he has to confront Gary head-on. A battle ensues as both Harold and Gary use their crayons to create objects and creatures to outdo one another. However, during the intense fight, Harold loses his crayon for a moment, giving Gary the upper hand. Just when things seem bleak, Mel's imaginary friend Carl arrives, charging at Gary. This surprise attack gives Harold and Mel a brief advantage, but their luck doesn't last long, as Gary eventually overpowers Carl, leaving the boys feeling hopeless once again. Desperate, Harold wishes his friends were there to help him, and to his amazement, his confidence brings them back. Porcupine and the others arrive just in time, returning Harold's crayon to him. With his friends by his side and his confidence restored, Harold takes a stand against Gary once more. This time, he taps into his full imagination, creating incredible things that put Gary on the defensive. It seems like Harold is about to win, but Gary, Indiana, a desperate move, eats the crayon, hoping to gain even more power. He begins to grow stronger, and it looks like the end for Harold and his friends. However, Harold, thinking quickly, recreates the spider bee that Mel had drawn earlier. The spider bee dives into Gary's mouth, wreaking havoc from within. Gary struggles as the creature causes chaos inside him, and he soon starts to lose control of the power he gains. As the spider bee forces its way out, Gary returns to his normal form, weakened and defeated. Harold and his friends have won, but not without learning the value of imagination, friendship, and the dangers of letting one's fantasies take over reality. As Gary struggles with the spider bee inside him, he suddenly drops the crayon, which Harold quickly retrieves. With the crayon back in his hands, well, technically in his legs, the great power that once defined him returns. Gary, realizing that he has been defeated, looks at Harold with a mix of regret and acceptance. Harold, ever kind-hearted, tells Gary that he believes he's a good person deep down, but that he needs to focus on doing the right thing. Gary, still yearning for his dream world, admits that all he ever wanted was to create the kingdom he wrote about in his book. Understanding this, Harold uses his crayon to create a door. When they open it, they see the exact kingdom that Gary had imagined on the other side. To Gary's surprise and joy, there is also a princess who looks remarkably like Terry. Gary, now at peace with his dream, thanks Harold and says goodbye before stepping into the door to live out his story. With Gary gone, Harold and his friends explore the late creator's belongings. Among them, Harold finds a letter addressed to him. In the letter, the creator reveals that he left Harold the magic crayon so that Harold could create his own story. Inspired and filled with a new sense of purpose, Harold realizes that it's time to return to his world. Before they leave, Harold and his friends say goodbye to everyone they've met in the real world. As they prepare to step back into their dimension, Harold notices that Mel has left him some colored crayons. With a smile, Harold steps back into his world, now ready to bring color and new adventures to his dimension. As the story wraps up, a friendly voice reminds the viewers, if you liked the video, here are some more recommendations. Have a great day.